By the time the woman in the floral muumuu told me my generator was a Class 3 violation of the community aesthetic and acoustic statutes, I already knew two things. First, she had no idea what she was talking about. And second, she was arrogant enough to make this personal. She stood on my porch with a clipboard to her chest and informed me I had 48 hours to remove the unit before fines began at $200 a day compounding. Her name was Karen, president of the HOA, guardian of lawn symmetry, porch paint, and whatever else let her feel important. Behind her sat my brand new whole house generator, professionally installed, mostly hidden by holly bushes, quiet enough to disappear under cicadas. To me, it was safety. To Karen, it was rebellion. She started talking about visual harmony and unapproved exterior machinery like I'd built a refinery beside the mailbox. I let her finish, took one slow breath, and said, "Karen, the unit complies with city code, county code, and your own bylaws. I sent the board the specs, the site plan, and my notice 2 months ago, certified mail. You signed for it." Something pinched in her face, but only for a second. Then she tapped her paperwork and told me the board had deemed the generator unacceptable anyway. Wrong appearance, wrong placement. Even the concrete pad, according to her, was not an approved shade of gray. I almost laughed. She had peeling trim on her own house and a lawn full of ugly garden gnomes, but suddenly she was the queen of aesthetics. What she didn't know, because she never asked, was that the generator wasn't about convenience. It was about my daughter, Lily. Lily was 8, funny, stubborn, the center of my whole life. A year earlier, she'd been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition. One of her medications had to stay refrigerated within a strict temperature range. Too warm, it spoiled. Too cold, same result. Miss a dose, and we weren't talking about a bad day, we were talking hospital pain and weeks of damage control. Sarah and I had already lived through one nightmare outage. I still remember driving across town at 2 in the morning with Lily's medicine packed in a cooler plugged into my truck, praying I could find somewhere with power. That was the night I promised myself we would never be that helpless again. So I did everything right. I read the HOA covenants cover to cover. There was no ban on generators. I sent formal notice with the plan, specs, installer information, and even a letter from Lily's specialist explaining the medical necessity. Then I waited. 30 days passed. Nothing. Under the HOA's own rules, no response meant approval. I had Karen's signed certified mail receipt. I had the timeline. I had the law. I had the facts. Karen had a clipboard. 2 days after installation, the first fine notice arrived. Then another. Then one for unapproved pad coloration. That rule didn't exist. A week later, she added one for inadequate landscaping buffer, even though the unit was hidden from the street. At that point, it stopped being annoying and started becoming revealing. Because power doesn't always show up in a uniform. Sometimes it waddles up your walkway in orthopedic sandals, acting like invented rules or law. Sarah wanted peace. I understood. Every letter from the HOA landed on our kitchen counter like a threat. "Maybe we just plant more bushes," she said one night, exhausted. "Maybe we give her something and make this stop." I looked toward Lily's room, saw the soft light under her door, and knew I couldn't fold. "This isn't about bushes," I said. "If we give her this, she'll own the next thing too." So I documented everything. Every letter, every fake violation, every photo, every date. I hired a sound engineer to test the generator, and at Karen's property line, it came in quieter than a dishwasher. I filed a formal appeal, denied. Not because they disproved anything, but because they ignored everything. That was Karen's real gift. She couldn't win on facts, so she treated facts like a rude suggestion. Then the story changed. One Saturday morning, I was in my garage cleaning tools when my neighbor Dave walked across the street and stuck out his hand. Former Marine, high and tight, haircut, voice like gravel. We'd waved before, never really talked. He said, "What Karen's doing to you is garbage." Dave told me she'd tried something similar with his basketball hoop the year before. Then Mrs. Gable from 2 doors down joined the conversation. Her husband George depended on an oxygen concentrator, and Karen had once tried to have their wheelchair ramp removed because it was an eyesore. The only reason that stopped was because Mrs. Gable's son was a lawyer. That was the twist. Karen hadn't targeted me because my case was unique. She'd targeted me because she thought I was alone. She'd been doing this for years, squeezing whoever looked tired, polite, or easy to scare. So we stopped acting like separate households and started acting like a team. Dave documented Karen's own violations. Mrs. Gable's son pulled HOA financials and found legal fees stacking up every time Karen started a personal crusade. I sent the whole mess to an old friend, Frank Peterson, a former JAG officer who now handled real estate litigation. Frank looked over the file and said, "Mark, this woman didn't hand you a problem. She handed you a lawsuit." And then the weather joined the fight. A hurricane started building in the Gulf. By the time Melissa pushed toward shore, the air felt bruised and the stores looked picked clean. That afternoon, Karen sent an HOA emergency email reminding residents that acoustic statutes would remain in effect during any outage and that unapproved generators were still prohibited. The storm hit after dark. Rain slammed the windows, transformers blew down the block, and then the neighborhood dropped into total blackness. For 3 seconds, there was nothing but wind. Then my generator clicked on smooth and automatic, and the house came back to life. Lights on, refrigerator humming, air running, Lily safe. She looked up at me and said, "The magic box is working, Daddy." Yeah, it was. By morning, the county was dark. My house sat there in the middle of it all, not loud, not flashy, just steady. And by that first evening, when the heat had turned everybody's freezers into ticking clocks, Karen came walking up my driveway. She did not look like a woman delivering decrees anymore. Her hair was damp, her face shiny with sweat, and there was no authority left in her voice when she asked if she could maybe charge her phones, maybe plug in a cooler, maybe save some important items from the freezer. She tried to frame it as community business, but the truth slipped out fast. It was steaks, ice cream, and panic. I won't pretend that moment wasn't satisfying, not because she was suffering, but because truth had finally caught up with performance. All that fake power, all those made-up rules, and there she was, begging for help from the very machine she had tried to outlaw. I told her no, calmly, politely, legally, no. I said it would be unsafe to run lines across properties in wet conditions, that my system was designed for my home's load, and that I had to follow code. Then I gave her back her own line. The rules are the rules, Karen. They exist to protect the community. But I didn't become her. I didn't help Karen, but I helped the people who truly needed it. I ran a cord to Mrs. Gable's house so George's oxygen concentrator could keep running. I ran another to Dave's refrigerator so his boys wouldn't lose their food. By the second day, neighbors were gathering in my driveway, sharing updates, clearing debris, checking on each other. My house stopped feeling like a fortress and started feeling like a command post. That's when Karen made her final mistake. On day 3, she stormed outside and started yelling that the cord running to Mrs. Gable's house was an unauthorized hazard. Before I could answer, Mrs. Gable stepped onto her porch and turned into thunder. She told Karen if she touched that cord, she'd call the police for reckless endangerment. Dave lifted his phone and started recording. Other neighbors came out. People who had been quiet for years found their voices all at once. And just like that, Karen's kingdom collapsed in public. After power came back, Frank filed everything: harassment, selective enforcement, discrimination, misuse of authority. He also notified the HOA's insurance carrier that the board might not be covered if their conduct counted as willful discrimination, which, judging by the letters Karen had pushed them to sign, it absolutely did. That's when the board panicked. They'd rubber-stamped her nonsense for so long they forgot signatures have consequences. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and for the first time that clubhouse didn't belong to Karen. Dave spoke. Mrs. Gable's son laid out the financial risk. Then I stood up and read the board's own sentence out loud, the one saying they were not bound by individual medical needs that compromised the visual integrity of the neighborhood. You could feel the room turn on her like weather. The vote to remove Karen was almost unanimous. All fines were rescinded. The HOA apologized. The rules were rewritten so no board could ever invent violations like that again, especially where medical equipment was involved. They reimbursed my costs and made a public donation in Lily's name to a foundation supporting children with autoimmune disease. A few months later, Karen sold her house and moved out, leaving behind her gnomes and the wreckage of her empire. And the thing that stays with me now is this: the real threat was never the generator, never the storm, never even the fines. It was what happens when small people get comfortable using systems as weapons. Most bullies don't stop because they find conscience. They stop because enough people stop being afraid. These days when I sit on that porch at sunset and hear Lily laughing in the yard, that quiet gray generator doesn't look like a machine. It looks like a line in the sand. A reminder that protecting your family will sometimes make you inconvenient to the wrong people, and that justice doesn't always arrive in one dramatic moment. Sometimes it comes slowly through paperwork, witnesses, patience, and one instant when the mask slips and everybody finally sees the truth. Karen wanted control. What she got was a public lesson in limits. So tell me this, when somebody hides behind rules to hurt people, is fighting back justice? Or just a cleaner form of revenge? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a power-tripping neighbor, or anybody who confused authority with decency, drop your story and tell me where you stand.